That's a little bit better, a little bit more. So thank you for coming. My name is Kate Newman. I'm the Vice President of Infrastructure, Sustainable Infrastructure at the World Wildlife Fund. In Europe, it's called Worldwide Fund for Nature, but we focus on our acronym, WWF, because we won the case against WWF, the wrestlers that you might be more familiar with. They started using our logo in the way that they had promised not to. Now they're WWE. So I need to explain that sometimes because there are many fans of WWE out there who don't like us anymore. But we focus on the panda, wildlife, conservation, climate change, better business practices, and increasingly infrastructure. And so today the discussion will be title, Infrastructure in a Changing World, Financing Resilience in Infrastructure Strategies. But before we get started, I have a little bit of housekeeping to do. First, I'd like to remind everybody, and you may have heard this already during these sessions, that this is a safe space for discussion. And one of the critical issues is, please don't take pictures of people that you have not asked permission to photograph. That those photographs end up on social media, and we need to make sure that we're polite and make sure you get permission. And then the second fun thing, it's the second time I've worked with Pigeon. Has anybody else worked with Pigeon before? Which is collecting your questions. And you should pull out your phone now. And the idea here is that, sorry, I'm still eating that Fisherman's Friends. The idea is that you take your phone, your laptop, or your iPad, and you put in the code that I'll give you, and it will come up and allow you to type in your questions at any point during the session, and then vote on other questions that you think are worth answering, and then that will roll up. And what I'll see here is the list of top selected questions, and it allows that question and answer period to go much more quickly and smoothly, and see what you actually are interested in hearing about as a group. So you can be adding those in from now forward. So please try pausing and talking slowly for a moment so that you can look at your phones and put in the password. And it's actually quite fun, especially when the voting, you'll get distracted by the voting. So I also have to ask you to actually listen to the speakers. So back to myself, why am I here? World Wildlife Fund is not widely known as an infrastructure-oriented institution, but we are a conservation organization concerned about the state of the planet. And of all the human endeavors that have an impact on the human planet, on the natural systems of the planet, infrastructure is one of the top three. Urbanization and expansion of urban centers, agriculture, of course, and then finally infrastructure. But infrastructure has historically been a difficult topic for the environment and conservation world to address because it's often so local and needs to be dealt with from local points of view. And it's, of course, many different sectors, and it's very complex. And it's been kind of saved for later in terms of the immediacy of conservation efforts. But WWF and my peers, and particularly a relationship with the ADB that's now 25 years old. We had an MOU, I think our actual anniversary is 2026, where we'll be celebrating an MOU with the Asian Development Bank. And with our partners, we're examining how to integrate and mainstream nature and climate issues into the development of infrastructure. So we work with the finance sector, which we'll talk quite a bit about today. We work with the engineering sector, which we'll also talk about, and I'm going to make a rude pitch here. It was brought up yesterday in a meeting that Jeff was in. This is the playbook for nature positive infrastructure development produced by AECOM on behalf of WWF in partnership with the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, Who'd have thought that you'd see a panda on an engineering playbook? But it was a fascinating exercise because AECOM, which is large, assumed they would find case studies within their own portfolio to showcase, and was actually disappointed that they didn't have as many nature positive examples to provide, and went out instead and looked at did a meta-analysis out there of the literature to find these cases. And the reasoning is that this is a fairly new challenge. How will we build resilience in systems that are not just made of concrete, but are also combined with the natural engineering that's so complex and so fit for purpose? How can we use that natural system to deliver some of the infrastructure services we need while we're also building things? And how can we blend those two together to get a better outcome, to deliver resilience not only of the infrastructure itself, but the ecosystems that serve humans, serve the actual infrastructure, creates the dependencies infrastructure has on vegetated slopes that are not going to erode the roads away. That natural system is critical, and it needs to stay resilient to the same climate changes that are affecting the physical infrastructure. So this is a more complex, integrated vision that's emerging from the UNFCCC mandate and the Convention on Biological Diversity and other G20 quality infrastructure. These are things that are pushing forward on really examining what it's going to take to be sustainable. And what we want to talk about today is how to get the financing to incentivize that sustainable, resilient future of infrastructure that we're going to need to serve our interests, to serve our needs for here and evermore. And so today we have a really fun mix of speakers who are going to talk about a tool, the FAST-Infra certification label, and you'll hear more about that. We'll talk about finance mechanisms at a country level, trying to crowd in private investment into sustainable infrastructure that's resilient in a montane system. We'll talk about other montane systems where both the communities and the ecosystems are vulnerable in the context of a new climate, but are serving the needs of millions. And especially if you think of them as water towers, billions of people depend on these ecosystems. So that mix today, combined with our fearless friend from the procurement division, which is when people say that Kate, why do you love procurement so much? I get a little, cocked head, like, why procurement? I love procurement. I'm just going to admit it. And I haven't said this to you before, Jeff, but I love it because it's a moment in time when before procurement, almost anything is possible. Good design, interesting opportunities, policy development, regulatory change, investment strategies. Procurement writes it all down, puts it out on the bid, and after that, there's almost nothing you could do to change the circumstances. So it's the watershed moments, the pinnacle, and getting the procurement world to understand all this complexity that's being added now in terms of biodiversity net gains, resilience, mitigation measures for climate change, along with all the social efforts that they've already been focusing on. It's a new era, and we hope to talk about that more today. So today, we're going to have a discussion. This is, I think, the only PowerPoint slide you'll see. It's a discussion. That's why I was encouraging people to sit closer, feel like you're in the discussion. And we'll start with introductions to our panelists, who I'll invite to the stage as I present them. And you can imagine the music and the drum roll as each person comes on the stage. So first, we have Ms. Bebe Gu. You can start walking and I'll talk as you come up dramatically. Pretend there's music. She's from China and is the vice president of the Green Finance Forum of 60, a civil society platform based in China aimed at mobilizing climate finance through innovative financing mechanisms. Bebe brings more than 15 years of professional experience in public policy research and advisory, strategy, and partnership building. in the field of green economy, climate finance, and sustainable infrastructure investment, with experience in UN organizations, civil society organizations, and the private sector. She's advised various UN partners, governments, and philanthropic funders on a wide range of sustainability issues. So we welcome you. Thank you. Then we have Tim Gocher. He's from the UK and still lives there. He's founder and CEO of Dolma Fund Management, which I'm finding absolutely fascinating. We'll hear more about that. One of the largest foreign direct investment investors in Nepal through the Dolma Impact Funds. Dolma has pioneered equity investments in renewable energy, healthcare, and technology sectors, and is launching the first international green bond for Nepal. He previously worked at Deloitte, JP Morgan, and Aon, and is an honorable professor. Is H-O-N honorable? Is that honoraries? All right, should have looked that up. H-O-N pro. Honorary professor, cool, of sustainable business at the University of Nottingham and guest lecturer at the London Business School, where he gained his MBA. Thank you, Tim. Now we have Arshia Karki. The program had another individual from the same organization, but she wasn't able to attend. Arshia is her colleague. She's from Nepal, lives in Europe, is a project manager at the Global Infrastructure Basel, or GIB, and helps manage the FAST-Infra Label, which is housed there with Bloomberg. Before GIB, she worked at the World Bank, IMF, and international organizations on helping shape policy and trade practices. She has a BA in economics from North Carolina and a master's in economics from Geneva. Victor, next to last. Victor Novakov, you can leap up that way, that's good, is from Tajikistan and is living in Europe now. He holds an MSc in environmental science and policy degree, and a policy degree, and has 2 decades of experience in projects in Central Asia and civil society organizations with governments and international organizations such as UNEP, UNECE, OSCE, which I don't know, I didn't look up, CEPF, and the World Bank. He served as team leader in environmental assessments on diverse teams, including climate resilience and adaptation, useful for this session, and sustainable mountain development. So 2 mountain habitats to explore today. And finally, Jeff Taylor, come on up. Jeff Taylor's from the UK and is currently living in Asia. He's the Deputy Director of Procurement at the Asian Development Bank. Jeff's been working on public procurement of infrastructure projects for 36 years, the last 16 of which has been with the ADB. At the ADB, he was the regional procurement head for Central West Asia, secretary to ADB's Operational Procurement Committee, head of ADB's Institutional Procurement Unit, and chairperson of its Institutional Procurement Committee, director of the Operational Procurement Division covering South, Central, and West Asia. Before joining the ADB, Jeff started working in procurement as a buyer, progressing to roles in the private sector consulting firms, working and living in multiple countries. And currently he serves as the ADB's procurement officer representing the ADB at the MDB Heads of Procurement Forum. That's all the MDBs, right? I think that's cool. And he's a chartered member of the Institute of Purchasing and Supply and holds a Master of Science in Procurement, which I had to say was a first for me, that you can get that. That's awesome. So thank you, panel. And I was going to join you with all this equipment. So I would like to kick off this discussion paying attention to the title of our event with a direct dive into the finance part of this picture and the role public and private finance play in incentivizing investing in resilient, sustainable infrastructure. So Baby, I will start with you. And then Tim, our 2 finance folks. In In your view, Baby, what are the key imperatives for resilience finance in today's rapidly changing global climate? And how can financial instruments drive change in infrastructure? You have a mic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kate, for this very kind introduction. And it's really a pleasure to be on this panel with a diverse background of important stakeholders that are actually making day-to-day decisions in how to allocate capitals and making their infrastructure investment more sustainable and more resilient. Thanks for these very important questions to start of the panel. I would say that the imperative for investing in nature is undeniable, especially looking at the world we are living right now. I guess everybody is having either a personal or very direct experience from everyday's news or from a lot of reports, which really paint a very sober picture of how the climate-related disasters have been eroding the development gains worldwide. I'll just start off by sharing a few latest figures. I think it was from last week that the Swiss Re, one of the largest reinsurance company, has released its annual analysis, and from that annual analysis, it says that the total economic loss from the nature hazard events in 2024 is amounting to about $320 billion US dollar, and this number is already quite a lot higher compared to 10-year average benchmark, which is around 250. So we are already seeing the direct economic loss from those natural-related extreme events. And if you look at a more long-term perspective, and for the past 30 years, actually we are seeing that those losses from natural-related events is happening in a faster speed compared to the global economic growth, actually almost doubling than the global GDP growth. So we are really seeing only by looking at those economic numbers that by not acting upon the climate-related hazards, it's going to cost us quite a lot of economic loss. And this is not to mention that all the extreme weathers and hazardous events is going to have a long-lasting and more indirect social impacts on the people, on the community, and also on the small businesses. And those are often the ones that are with the least resources to respond and to bounce back from extreme shocks of the events. So I would say that the imperative for building resilience and also investing in climate adaptation strategy is a very clear one. Both make economic sense, but also make environmental and social sense. And the second point I wanted to make is that because for this session, we are focusing on infrastructure. So I wanted to spend a few minutes to really unpack why investing in resilience infrastructure matters today. There's a figure also I want to share with the audience, which was funded by a UN report, which says that actually 88% of the adaptation costs are related to infrastructure. So we are talking about, building dikes, dams to, for flood protection. We're talking about developing improved weather intelligence or early warning systems, etc., in order to build more resilience into the system. But I wanted to mention that it is not only about building more infrastructures for adaptation purpose only. We also need to, there's a rather urgent action areas is to really look into upgrading the existing infrastructure, which are built in the past and often, and I mean, now no longer being disaster proof. And, coming from the part of the Asia where, I come from China, and there are many mega cities, and there's vast urbanization. So we actually built and developed a lot of infrastructure in the recent decades. But still, giving this elevated pace of extreme weathers, we also see that some of the major cities, even in China, with some of the latest built infrastructure, having a difficulty to cope with. I'll just give a quick example. In 2021, in a major city in China, in central China, called Zhengzhou, the province city of Henan province, a city with 13 million population. In July 21st, for 1 hour, the city actually receives a total rainfall that it typically receives within a month. So that actually put extreme pressure on the whole city's infrastructure systems. And we have seen some pretty devastating pictures. And one of the newly built metro system was actually flooded within minutes, leaving people really, impossible to respond or to evacuate. So I think the key message here is really that we are truly living in a rapidly changing world. And it is really essential to make sure that when we are building new infrastructures, that we must apply a forward-looking perspective, and also to actively embed the resilience and adaptation perspectives into the new infrastructure building. I'll stop here.
Terrific. Can you share the mic with your next finance colleague? So this is a great framing of the challenges we face and the complexities. And Tim, you're working in a particular country on making this happen. So what are some of the innovative financing mechanisms you've seen successfully implemented, perhaps in your global experience and in resilient infrastructure projects, and specifically, and maybe in your country where you're working now on that new DOMA model that we'd love to hear about? And then how could a model like that be scaled back up into global operations?
Great, thanks, Kate. I think let me set the scene first with Nepal and why it's vital for sustainable infrastructure. So Nepal obviously is nestled among the highest Himalayan mountain peaks. As you said, mountains are a water tower. And what's happening with global warming is the glaciers are melting increasingly rapidly. And that's causing floods and landslides, not just in Nepal, of course, but downstream in the vastly populated areas of Bangladesh and India. But this isn't just caused by global warming. The glaciers are melting 40% faster, according to ICIMOD, a mountain research institute, because of black carbon, or soot, the darkening of the surface from mostly coal-fired power stations in India and Bangladesh. So there is also a localized climate change phenomenon where if we can reduce black carbon pollutants, we will be able to immediately slow the rate of glacial melt. In fact, if Nepal meets its targets of investing in renewable energy infrastructure of 46 billion over the next 10 years, that will export up to 10,000 megawatts to India and 5,000 megawatts to Bangladesh, if all that was online tomorrow, it would take just one winter's snowfall to stop that 40% acceleration of the glacial melt. So it's a problem with a solution. Now, on to your question, Kate, about how to finance that. So if Nepal wants to spend 46 billion on what is largely hydropower in Nepal because of the fast-flowing rivers, but also increasingly solar power and the transmission distribution that goes along with it, Nepal does not have $46 billion or anything like $46 billion, probably not $4.6 billion. And so the vast majority of that needs to come from foreign direct investment in equity and mostly debt to finance that infrastructure. Now, Nepal is a least developed country. So what we are doing, we run 2 private equity funds which invest in infrastructure. We've developed, already commissioned 4 hydropower plants. We're building more. We've developed the first on-grid solar plant in Nepal, and we're developing another 90 megawatts of solar. And so we've got a fair bit of experience, and our investors come from the DFI community, MDBs, so IFC are an investor, FMO, BII, and many others. So I think the first thing to do is the country needs a track record. People like us that have invested, made some money, hopefully repatriated, and that is the best way to attract more capital. But the other is in the debt side. So Nepal has a fairly shallow, a fairly good banking system, but fairly shallow in terms of the requirement for capital. So we are trying to issue, in partnership with FCDO, the British government, the first international green bonds for Nepal. They will be listed on the London Stock Exchange, and they will be the first actually international securities of any kind backed by Nepalese assets. And so how do you crowd in private sector? Because the buyers of those bonds, we want to be the buyers of the big insurance funds, the big pension funds, etc. And we do that, of course. Nepal's credit rating is not very high. The Nepalese rupee is obviously not a popular currency for international bond markets. And so we've taken the view that we are going to issue in Indian rupees, offshore Indian rupees. Now, that was quite cool when we came up with that idea. It's very cool now. The dollar has come off the boil. And so looking at currencies in Nepal's case, and Nepal's currency is pegged to the Indian rupee. There are many African countries which ultimately are pegged or trading within a band with the euro. And I think where the world is now with dollar bond markets a bit iffy, the world is increasingly looking at other currencies to issue international finance. So I think the currency is important. I also think that blended finance is essential. If we have to buy, we're working with GuarantCo, which is part of the PIDGE group, to provide a AA- credit rating, credit guarantee. So our bonds will be AA-, even though Nepal's credit rating is BB-. And that means that institutional investors can buy it. But the cost of buying that credit enhancement is very expensive, and correctly very expensive. If it's priced at genuine risk, anything could go wrong. Nepal could default, there could be an earthquake, there could be one of many disasters that happen. They have to pay the bondholders. So that is expensive. I think where we're at now is that makes it too expensive for local developers of hydropower to borrow. The local market is, say, 9%. If we add the cost of GuarantCo, it's 11%. Nobody's going to buy bonds at 11%. Nobody's going to borrow at 11% if I can get it for 9%. So I think what really has to happen is to get behind these groups that provide innovative finance structures on credit enhancement, on currency hedging. The world, GCF, the World Bank, ADB, need to get behind these groups to allow them to offer pricing which makes the debt finance work. I think that would be my one ask from the global capital community.
including our friends at.
Well, I was sort of, putting an eye to Jeff, but I do know ADB are one of the leaders in blended finance because we're working closely with them.
Great. So now we have an opportunity to hear one of the solutions being developed at the asset level to help with the investor certainty that's essential to achieve what Tim was just describing in a context that Baby laid out for us. So would you like to explain how FAST-Infra works?
Sure. Thanks, Kate. So we've already heard two cases, where sustainable infrastructure investments are needed. And our solution, which is the FAST-Infra Label. So FAST-Infra stands for Finance to Accelerate the Sustainable Transition Infrastructure. And it's a globally applicable certification system that evaluates sustainable infrastructure. So our main goal is to create a credible, consistent, and transparent framework that helps transform sustainable infrastructure into a mainstream liquid asset class, making it easier for investors to find, assess, and fund projects that can deliver real sustainability outcomes. And just to 2 points on how FAST-Infra Label addresses the growing need for sustainable and resilient infrastructure. So I would like to highlight 2 points here. So first is market integrity. So the label, it establishes clear sustainability metrics, minimum standards, risk management, and independent review of projects. So this promotes integrity and reduces greenwashing. And second, the framework of the FAST-Infra Label is built upon 55 existing sustainability standards and frameworks. So this provides a unified and trusted approach that helps investors identify projects with genuine sustainability credentials, which reduces the uncertainty and risk that investors usually want to stay away from. And that's how I would like to wrap up why FAST-Infra is the solution.
I have a little bit of history with FAST-Infra working on the Sustainable Criteria Committee, and it was very interesting to watch the community of private investors and public sector banks get involved in trying to create a solution for attracting investment in the developing and emerging economies where so much need is, but so much potential damages if they don't get it right. So the need is there, and fantastic work. Now we've talked about unlocking capital, liquidity. We've talked about the framing of how climate and sustainability is going to be shaping the market. But are all of these ideas, these green bonds and so forth, fit for purpose on the ground? And Victor, you have a lot of experience in countries that are striving to achieve connectivity and are often very interested in doing it sustainably. Can you give us some highlights of what you're seeing in Central Asia?
Thank you, Kate. And thanks for mentioning mountains in the very beginning, and also Tim reflecting on some key numbers on glacier melt. Indeed, Asia is a region with the largest mountains in the world. Scientists call it, and journalists, water towers. And there is a water tower index, shows high dependency of downstream communities. Mountains of Central Asia are also biodiversity hotspots. The areas which have a very rich, unique biodiversity, at the same time they have highest pressures, biodiversity hotspots. And you have all sorts of impacts from climate change, from pollution, plastic pollution starting in the mountain peaks and mining sites and extractive industries. And of course you have rivers, and I saw in the corridors many publications, but CSOs reflecting on impact of hydropower, for example, on water ecosystems from the mountains. On the other hand, development need to happen because mountain communities are most isolated, and in winter they can be completely blocked due to snow avalanche risk or icy roads or glacier surges or floods. And cost of infrastructure development in mountains is usually higher, maybe double or triple cost comparing to lowlands. And that's why it's very important to consider, in addition to engineering solutions, nature-based solutions as well, because that's investment into the future. And what we observe is that in the mountains of Asia, there is a boom of energy, both small and large, and hydropower is the most concerning for civil society organizations for various reasons. Liner infrastructure is another issue, but again, we need to look always on pros and cons. Yes, there are always impacts, side impacts, or actually what matters in the mountains are also cumulative impacts. You might have small impacts from each side, which grow, I can't say exponentially, but substantially towards downstreams. And you have, due to climate change, you also have hidden impacts, which may not be obvious right now, but they will be obvious in 10, 20, 30 years, where climate proofing is very important. For example, for mining sites in Central Asia, most of the gold is extracted at 4,000 meters with permafrost, with glaciers, under glaciers. What happens to them in 10, 20 years? So this is where infrastructure planners, engineers need to seriously consider these risks. But we need to remember that it also brings opportunities. Dams, small or larger ones, can also be used as effective adaptation measures, especially for downstream communities to regulate water flow. And we think that what, for example, ADB is already doing as Asia Climate Bank, as they have a very interesting glacial melt initiative covering Central Asia and Greater Asia. So we do see that development banks are already covering that. And because we work with civil societies, often the activities are very small and localized, but they can be very complementary to what governments plan and what large financial institutions plan. So it's good if both sides can listen to concerns of each other and consider this in infrastructure planning.
Are you finding the communities you work with receptive to thinking about these broad issues? What are the constraints?
It's a mixed picture. Like mountains are very contrasting environments, geographies. On the one hand, you have rain, on the other, it's rain shadow. So same with communities. Some communities very much want development, large economic corridors, they see benefits. Other communities where they perceive or see, it's actually almost the same. When they perceive risk, grave risk, for example, from extractive industries, so they are opposing or they asking critical questions actually. And what is probably missing in this is that both developers and local communities, they mostly look in the current perspective. They don't look into the future often. And often this cumulative perspective and long-term perspective,
it's hard for all of us to look into the future, I have to say. But I can see the challenges people face there. And I've been working a little bit in the Central Asian mountains in Nepal, and the unique features of trying to both develop linear infrastructure, roads, rail, power lines, canals that go through many, many habitats, one project, highly complex challenges, but the need for resources, the need for development, the need for connectivity in these previously isolated places is becoming more and more apparent to these communities. So these are examples on the ground, some framing, some innovative financial mechanisms. And let's talk about the ADB for a moment, giving the context here. And Jeff Taylor, from your perspective at the ADB, how can multilateral institutions like the ADB further enhance their role in financing sustainable and resilient infrastructure. And then to drill down to your specialty, procurement, as I said, that watershed moment where everything changes and it's critical to get the procurement right. How can procurement help to achieve the vision? And then eventually, after you've described all that, let's start talking about this collaboration issue, which is one of the objectives here at this annual meeting, on how to bring civil society together with the ADB to address many of these challenges, provide incentives, address challenges, build in the complexity you talked about in that session yesterday with your partners.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate. And to Tim's point, it's my old procurement response. Oh yeah, that's not procurement, the financing bit. But there certainly is a mandate from the MDBs to scale up its operations, to leverage private sector and other sources of funding, to think about blended finance, concessional lending, underwriting risk and similar, to leverage activities as such as you're doing. Not a promise from ADB, but it's a space we need to, as MDBs, if you look at the G20, ask of us to expand our impact, if not our balance sheets, because they won't give us any more money, so we can't, our impact and leverage what we already have. And I think that's a conversation that's ongoing and is essential in responding to the existential threats we have before us now. In terms of bringing this down to my nuts and bolts stuff, it's buying stuff. It can't be that hard. You do it every week at the supermarket. Yeah, exactly. There's a huge amount procurement can do. Procurement traditionally came from a pretty adversarial setup of, here is the process, comply with it or you're out. And that was the procurement system I first started working in, where you say no to your clients and you shout at the suppliers. That's changed. There's been a paradigm shift in terms of the expectations for the value that can be leveraged through public procurement. You can see various OECD figures estimating it's between 12 and 14 and 16% of global GDP. But trillions upon trillions of dollars are being spent on public procurement globally. And I think it has the opportunity to shape markets, which can attract investment. A couple of the areas I look at when I first got this job of Chief Procurement Officer, what did I want it to be? I wanted my impact to be a more sustainable procurement system, not how fast I approve stuff, the volume of lending, but more sustainability in ADB's procurement operations to integrate social nature, natural solutions, environmental solutions into the core of the procurement processes. And one of the reasons ADB is an infrastructure bank. The built environment accounts for about 40% of global emissions in terms of carbon. Steel on its own, 17%, 18% of global emissions. Cement and concrete, another 7 or 8% of global emissions, just producing them. Then you add on top of that what the asset does, whether it's a road, a railway, an office block. And, I was at Tufts University last year on a climate financing course in an absolutely wonderful management training center with no bloody windows. Okay, you couldn't open a window when it was a bit too hot. You had to turn on the aircon. The windows in the building didn't open. How difficult is it to have openable windows? I don't think it's new technology, is it, Kate? Probably not. And then I look at the Delhi Diamond Exchange, for example, a building that is built without air conditioning. No, it's built with natural air conditioning. In terms of its alignment, in terms of the materials used and evaporative processes. Then I look at the National University of Singapore and what it's done with one of its faculties, entirely made of sustainable timber. So there is so much more we can be doing in the procurement space. And one of those things is, how can this help financing and how can this draw in private sector money? If you start creating a demand and signaling to the market, and I'm thinking as a specific example here of green cement in India, okay, low carbon cement, used for a wastewater treatment plant. We found that we did the market research. We found that the local cement industry did have low carbon cements on the market. Their chemical and physical properties were on a parallel with ordinary Portland cement and traditional ways of doing things. So we specified a low carbon type of cement. It depends on the application and usage. It's not fit for purpose for everything. It's actually better at some things than traditional cement. And we use that. And the great news was it reduced the carbon produced by 60,000 tons, the embodied carbon in that structure. It is actually a cement that is more resistant to chemical activity, so it will last longer than ordinary Portland cement. And the great thing is it costs 20% less because it used less energy to produce. And to start specifying that, to start using and factoring in issues like that with green steel. Green steel is a different challenge, unfortunately, and a harder one, because you need scrap to produce it. Most of developing Asia doesn't have the scrap. The industrialized nations have scrap as they tear down old facilities and so on. And that actually, you need 30 to 40% scrap in your steel manufacturing process to bring the carbon down. Otherwise, you have to re-gear new electrical blast furnaces using renewable energy, retiring billions upon billions of dollars of not yet obsolete investment in terms of traditional blast furnaces, gas-fired, and so on. But there is so much we can do in procurement by integrating these things in. Eco-labeling, and it starts with the small stuff. If you really want to get a view of the impact upon the environment and nature of what you're financing and what you're building, you have to start small and build up the picture. You've got to look at the supply chain. But leading on to that, if you do that within an economy and an environment, you are actually going to end up creating a competitive advantage for your economy. And that should be appealing. If you look at what's happening at the EU, the barriers that it may put up around Scope 3 emissions, and if you can't track that, you will lose access to an export market, or you'll potentially get hit with that horrible word tariff. And I think it's coincidental that America is going to be 250 years old, and the wealth of nations is going to be 250 years old. And one is denying the existence of the other. Fundamental economic theory on this is being challenged. But it is a potential competitive advantage. You look at China's evolution in renewables. China has been the largest investor in renewable energy in the world and is actually outstripped the rest of the world in terms of the scale of renewable energy investments in China. So it's not only because of geography and the location of polysilica, it is to do with the expertise and capacity in renewable energy development that means it can actually then sell that to the rest of the world. But other companies can copy that. Other companies can replicate that advantage. But I wouldn't duplicate it, but you can replicate it in areas that you are strong in. Electric vehicles, America and Tesla, whatever you think about Elon Musk, I admire their strategy and pioneering EVs, making them popular. You remember the Sinclair C5, probably Kate, maybe you. It wasn't a great success. It was pioneered in the UK, and it was a death trap, and it went 3 kilometers an hour. But that was groundbreaking. Yeah, got the ball rolling. BYD and the full might of Chinese manufacturing, a manufacturing giant is there. And you're looking at the history of Toyota was the dominant automobile manufacturer 10, 20 years ago until fairly recently. And there are new kids on the block, and for good reasons. EVs are better than gasoline. So your procurement strategies can shape those markets. They can induce manufacturers to invest in green and sustainable technology. Start thinking about product declaration certificates. Start thinking about eco-labeling. Start thinking about the measurement and certification of what's in there. That goes to nationally determined contributions on carbon reduction. As carbon markets evolve, those may become tradable commodities to raise revenue for further investment, and so forth. And then for me, on the procurement front, it is about the actual measurement of embodied carbon in that infrastructure asset, and the actual impact upon the environment, the actual impact upon the natural environment. It's a lot cheaper not to chop down trees. I was reminded with the Nepal case and the flash floods that wiped out so much infrastructure a few years ago, and the need to build it back very differently in ways that have never been done before. And I was thinking of Typhoon Ondoy, where we had 400 millimeters of rain in 6 hours. And that was just the beginning of Ondoy. It carried on for another 20 hours. 400 millimeters is 5 months of UK rainfall in 6 hours on Manila, which is concreted over with nowhere for that water to go. You need to keep natural wetlands reserved within those urban spaces for those climate shocks. Otherwise, every time it rains, everything gets wiped out. And also, everything gets flushed into the water table as well. All of the crud and the rubbish and the carbon and God knows what else gets flushed into the ecosystem.
Can I respond with a question to the ADB represented by you?
Okay.
Many of the things you described in a country, like using a new carbon reduction concrete mix, requires codes and regulation changes. And many of the techniques involved in this sort of advancing of blended natural and gray infrastructure requires that the engineering schools even provide the guidance and the training, or somebody has to provide that training. Do you see the ADB, now that you've recognized the value of including these kinds of things in the value chain of any new infrastructure, are you involved in supporting countries develop the capacity to implement these and to review their codes and to allow these? The United States doesn't allow new kinds of concrete very easily. For example, codes take forever, and it takes convincing. So I'm wondering how your institution can help build that enabling environment to allow your procurement to drive in this new direction.
There's two ways of doing. Yes, we can, and we should. And there's two ways to do this. Number one is by incorporating in these standards into the specifications. So in India, we did the market research. We sat down with the Global Concrete and Cement Manufacturers Association. We checked their emergent standards with their 2050 zero goal. We checked the ability of the market, and we just simply specified it. Our borrower and our client was happy with this. It was certified under the Green Pro labeling scheme, which is regulated by Indian Ministry of Commerce. So we went ahead and did it, and that was the cement we were buying, or the client was buying. Yes, we do talk about it at a policy level. We work with the Philippine government, we work with the Vietnamese government, we're working with the Thai government on introducing green procurement codes. We're also working at a very arm's length, because we don't want to interfere with this, with the decarbonisation initiative, and also with the Global Cement Manufacturers Association, who have proposed standards to UNIDO, which is the Global Industrial Standards body, for what qualifies as low carbon cement. And then you have a taxonomy that is globally accepted by the UN agency overseeing it. Okay, the Americans may disagree, but who knows? They haven't particularly at the moment. And I want to start specifying this where the market can respond. Otherwise, you're having a disbenefit. You'll be buying low carbon cement from 5,000 kilometers away. The shipping cost is going to produce 4 times as much carbon as purchasing it producing it locally with old-fashioned technology. So you've got to be careful about disbenefits. So yes, there is a lot we are doing. There's more we can still do. I was in India last weekend at India Steel 2025, supporting the Indian Ministry of Steel with a green steel procurement code. And we're trying to advocate with the Ministry to the Ministry of Finance that this is a good thing to adopt. Ministry of Finance is quite legitimately concerned and said, okay, what impact is that going to have on this country's infrastructure investment portfolio. And it will have an impact. It will cost more.
Yeah.
But, what will be the benefits? Well, the benefit might be, okay, well, if you're making green steel and you're doing specialty steel, you can get it into the EU tariff-free. Or the US, well, the other markets.
Other markets.
Other markets. You can sell it to the rest of the world or most of it.
So moving on to one of the purposes of this meeting today about collaboration, we've got a think tank, we've got an investor group, we've got NGO working on the certification process, and NGO on advocacy, NGO on science and advocacy, all seeking relationships with ADB. How do you see that evolving, and where do you see that from your own point of view at the bank?
Okay, I think procurement, from my own procurement point of view, it's not so much focused on CSOs, but public procurement and the MDBs particularly we never look at the other side of the dyad. We always think about what we want. We don't talk to industry enough. We don't listen to what they can do. I have no favorite contractors. I hate them all. I'm an old-fashioned procurement person. But one of the contractors I may suspend my dislike for, Acciona, I was amazed and really impressed when I found out in their risk management matrix. I used to work for a consulting firm, and it was always financial viability, payback periods, and everything else. They have environmental impact. And when the environmental cost goes into the red, even if they're making money, it's a no-go. They do not pursue that project. They don't pursue that project. So there's stuff we can learn about their environmental impact assessments and the criteria they're applying. And I found that fascinating. And can we actually, from a procurement perspective, say, how are you going to manage when we go out to market? How are you going to manage these risks that we've identified? Land remediation, social impact, employment of disadvantaged groups, and increasingly SMEs will recognize the importance of the MDBs, that big is not beautiful. SMEs are a much better driver for circular economic benefit. And they hang around in the market. They don't disappear.
Well, we are going to now target the panel and let this same question flow, but we do have an intervention from the audience. An ADB person? Okay. You can come up and grab my mic.
So yeah, highly appreciate Jeff from our procurement department being here. My name is Heidi Ear-Dupuy. I head ADB's NGO and Civil Society Center. We actually have one example from ADB where we work with an infrastructure development in Armenia, where we work with the communities and the government on a third-party monitoring, where the communities were trained in how to monitor some of the projects, a school seismic construction project, and actually communities were trained, and then they report back to the projects. And then it was a red light, green light system, like a dashboard, where then when the problem is fixed, then the light turns green. And actually there was an NGO here from Armenia who was talking about it and shared a bit of the work that they were doing. But that's some of the example of how communities can be involved. But I have a question actually for our investor about whether communities can be part of the fund to put money into some of these investment projects. I mean, communities and civil society who have like WWF, do you put money into some of these funds that would go into the projects that you would like to see happen for the better of the environment and the communities? So that's my question as well. Thank you.
Hey, this is one way to skip pigeon and come straight up on stage to get your question. Very creative. Innovation was part of it. Yeah. Well, it's okay. It's the ADB meeting. We need to hear the voice of the ADB as well as our CSO pals. So who would like to respond to all these perspectives? And we'll start the conversation and get to the audience momentarily, which means it's time to start putting in your questions, please, into Pigeon. And we'll get to your questions shortly. Tim, you want to start? Thanks.
So I think that concept of communities investing in funds for sustainable infrastructure is a fascinating one and one we're working on. One peculiar and pleasant feature of Nepal is that when you do an IPO for a energy infrastructure project, you have to offer discounted shares to the local community. So in a sense, there you are inviting, and we have very little social issues. I'm increasingly excited about the opportunity for financial inclusion. Almost by definition, all of our projects are in remote, poor areas. You don't build a hydro plant in a city, obviously. And so by encompassing the local community, let's say they're going to subscribe to these discounted shares. Well, they need a bank account. They need a stock market account. They've probably got a smartphone and they can manage that. Now they've got an asset on the back of which they can borrow, they can get insurance, they can use smartphones. So we're raising a new fund of which I hope ADB or PSO will be part of. And we're going to deploy some technical assistance to drive financial inclusion in the communities around our infrastructure projects, to use this subscription of shares, but really to build a platform of financial inclusion, which could, of course, include broader national or WWF or WWE projects, if they're into wrestling. Is that not relevant?
They've got tons of money.
Oh, they've got tons of money. Okay, so WWE doesn't need any money, but WWF does. I think that's a fascinating point. I just wanted to comment on one other thing, and that's the concept of going above and beyond the standards set by a local developing nation, which is what you were talking about, Jeff, with procurement. And this is, I find, quite baffling. We abide by IFC standards, FMO standards, IFC performance standards, ILO, lots of things, which means we're often demanding more from our development partners and the government than the government demands of us. And that's interesting. I'll give a couple of stories about that. One on the social side. So we were building a hydro plant. There's an informal, which means illegal, community living on the riverbank mining stones. And they're living in shacks. They have no right to the land. And because our hydro plant would increase the risk of flooding, under our rules, we have to move them. Under the government's rules, they don't have any right to be there. And I think, obviously, so we moved 27 households. We effectively rebuilt a village. And obviously the community is very happy with that, the local community. But the developers sort of like, you want us to do what? Really? If it was an official village that would be flooded, that's a different thing. But I think now we've done that, everybody's happy. The local government is happy that we did that. Obviously that community are happy and the developers happy. Another one is in environmental stuff, where we will design fish passes for hydro dams based on the fish species and a scientific analysis. But there are 4 projects upstream that just put in a bit of concrete and say this is a fish pass. And we've seen the fish population deplete, not because of us, but because of the ones upriver. So we've got to get governments to look at cumulative impact assessments of this. I'll stop there.
Who would like to add? Keep the conversation going for a few minutes.
Maybe I can also quickly add a couple of thoughts responding to Heidi's question. I think first of all, I fully agree with what Tim has said, that this is extremely important, and usually engaging and making the local community participating in financing and investment decisions will also increase their ownership of the total projects. I would say that maybe on the financing facility level, it's a little bit complicated and difficult, and really depending on the specific context. in each countries. But I've seen that for example, at project level, it is very well possible to integrate and to actually invite individuals or community participants in projects. For example, like distributed solar PV projects in China. I think there's a major rollout of distributed solar PV projects at a rural level, really at the the village level. The household are invited to participating by they're very well established commercially viable financing models for them to be able to rent their roofs and also to receive a stable revenue streams. So I think probably we could start with piloting or trying with more commercially viable solutions, but also recognizing the need for financing for resilient and climate adaptation infrastructure projects, which is, I would say, still a bit challenging, because I think even the financial communities are still considering this as a quite new and emerging concept. Really understanding what it entails for a resilient economic activity. So I think there's a need for better definition, better standards, better frameworks, better classification, so that the financing sector can use this to make their investment decisions. And also very important is really to identify a clear pricing signal, so that financing in resilience infrastructure is an investable asset class.
Jeff, that's a tall order for you. You wanted to respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually build on the very good points just made. Probably not answer the question sufficiently, but there's also social resilience and the need or the benefit of incorporating that into assets as you create them. And we're increasingly looking at this in the Pacific. I've seen it work well in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Zambia. But if you actually engage the local community in the creation and maintenance of the asset, not only do they have a financial stake in it in terms of what Tim was describing, but they can gain employment from it. And if they gain employment from it and you upskill them, we have a program called Build for Skills that incorporates TVET apprentices into construction contracts, and they actually stay behind and maintain that asset. They take an income from it. It's important to them. And if you didn't do that in Afghanistan, they would just simply blow up your asset. It's just the way it works there. And I do remember a railway in Pakistan. I'm saying to a colleague, why do they keep blowing up this railway and not that one? And they said, well, it was built 140 years ago, but the army engineer who built it paid off the tribal leaders not to do it and used the tribe to work on creating the railway line. So they've left it alone for 140 years. The other one, they didn't do that, so they blow it up every week. But it was a socially inclusive railway in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is a fun place to go. Not right now anyway. And it was because that was built in a socially inclusive way, the asset was maintained better. It was still there.
That's a very useful lesson for community engagement. The perception of higher costs, the perception of higher time. These are things that are blocking the capital investment to get things rolling. But letting these kinds of projects happen and watching their outcome be successful has to model our work into the future. And now it's time to see if anybody's willing to type into Pigeon, because I don't see anything on Pigeon, but that might be because I've been writing on it. So we'll just go ahead and do it the normal way. But that means you'll have to wait for the mic to come. Click it up or down, whichever. It's not there.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll do.
Give it to Lily.
So we tried to submit questions on Pigeon twice, but it seems that there's something on the app. So thank you for letting us speak. I'm Linnea Wikström from the Global Trade Union Movement. And we have some examples about how to include procurement or job requirements in procurement, and also how to linking it with green skills. So what many of the contractors today talk about is the lack of skilled labor when they're trying to do green infrastructure projects, because it requires another level. So some best practices, I think it happens in Norway, is about having apprenticeship programs included in the procurement. So also developing the workforce within the projects instead of having always a separate project for training that's not included in the project work. So have any one of you experienced something similar on how to develop skills within projects? And it's something that ADB are working on, how to ensure also the job development within these projects. Thanks.
We're doing it. Okay, the construction contract is independent from the training, but we've done it in Mongolia, we're doing it in Papua New Guinea, we're doing it in Fiji, by which the contractors are required to take on apprentices from local TVET programs. And certainly in Mongolia, we're very, very pleased. 70% of those apprentices are now full-time employees. So you know they have usable skills, and we are doing it, and we want to scale it up. But also, it's not just about the individual. It's about small and medium-sized companies in the locality developing the skills. And yes, there are labour shortages or skills shortages. Sometimes very high unemployment, such as Papua New Guinea, massive unemployment there. It's not about the money. It's about developing that community. That will come at a cost, yes, as you train them up. But we want local, not content, but we want to see local participation plans, because that goes to circular economic benefits, but it also goes to the longevity and sustainability of the investment. So yes, we are doing it. And we are incorporating the use of TVET apprentices in construction contracts. And I would like to see it done more broadly. It was actually an initiative worked on and led by GTZ and ADB. And we're trying to scale it up into more countries and use it similarly.
But that's the assumption that the big companies, that apprenticeships are built on the idea that the main contractor has the capacity and will train the apprentice on the job. But we're also finding the reason why I held up that playbook is it was the international consulting engineers who came to an NGO to say, we need to do more on climate change. And we said, you need to do more on nature too. And these are the biggest companies in the world. And AECOM was a little disappointed not to know how to do this already. So I'm also seeing a need for the big institutions, because of the lack of education in their schooling, to also learn these new techniques. And I wonder how banks could catalyze that. Courses, certifications, incentives somehow to advance their thinking.
Yeah, we need to. I mean, we don't have sufficient resources to invest in capacity development in the ways that we would like. It's something with infrastructure deficits. Our borrowers are quite slow at borrowing for when they need roads, railways, metros, and so on. But one of the things we can do is local employment is always a positive for our clients when they see that benefit accruing to their citizens through, and therefore it's actually not a cost they object to as much as borrowing. So if you incorporate it into a construction contract and they see opportunity for the local community, they get local community buy-in. if you help develop the curriculums, and this Germany is so very good at vocational training, you know, it's domestic model, and it's German know-how and expertise that helped us design this. But then, you know, contractors say there's a deficit. We'll go and talk to the technical colleges about filling that gap. And having students come through, and talk to the contractors saying, you've asked for this, you use them. We're not actually giving you a choice. We're telling you, you will have an apprentice program as part of your implementation.
Make a difference. We have another question over here.
Yeah, thank you. I also submitted 2 questions to Pigeonhole, but it didn't deliver. Okay. Okay, thank you. My question is related to the distinguished panelist. Climate finance is increasing, but access is uneven and bureaucratic. In this context, how do you see the developing countries or developed countries have a political will to provide the infrastructure more funds? I know you mentioned the market-based bonds could be the one, but the government will is not there. And second question is the effectiveness of the procurement. Does the ADB have sustainable finance procurement framework? When you are looking at the outside industries, we do not have a climate-proof any kind of a portfolio. For instance, the strong steels or low carbon steels. So when the industry does not have a available portfolio, how would you go to procure those for the development of the projects? Thank you.
If our 2 finance people at the end of the row can work on that first one, while Jeff contemplates the second. Yeah.
So did I understand the first question? Basically, how do developing countries get enough capital, both from private sector and government? Is that roughly the question? So, you know, there's an interesting and not very good thing happening with governments, at least the governments that have the most money. US aid obviously is dead. And that was, I think, the biggest bilateral giver. I don't suppose they're overly forthcoming with their contributions, I don't know, to ADB. And because of the pullback in America generally, European nations, certainly the UK, has had to cut its aid budget to increase military spending because it can no longer rely on the US as a defense ally. And I think the same is happening across Europe at least. And so this means at a time when we need to be stepping up finance for sustainable prosperity and development, the government side of that equation has suddenly been slashed. And that's a very serious situation. What it means is that the on-ramp for least developed countries to be ready to attract private sector foreign direct investment just got a whole lot steeper, because it can no longer, things like capacity building, the programs that US aid used to run are no longer there. So I think now we need to really be supporting that on-ramp to capital markets. I think we will rely less on government-funded solutions. And there needs to be a real understanding from developing countries that they need to get the kind of business climate ready to attract private sector.
Thank you. Jeff, do you want to work on this?
Yeah, on the procurement, I mean, you can't buy stuff that's not in the supermarket. Okay, I mean, green steel is nascent in India. It will come eventually. And it will take time, and you know, not just carbon, but nature-based solutions that have zero impact on the environment, or actually make the environment better as well, equally. But what procurement can do is start signaling the market and just say, okay, in the first instance, I'm going to specify either or. In the second instance, and you need to be transparent with the market and let them know your policy in this area. So, okay, on day one, I'm going to say you can offer me A or B. A being the best and B being the status quo. Day two, I'm actually going to give an advantage to A because I do prefer it. So manufacturers that give me A will get a 5% advantage or whatever it will be in evaluation. I'm going to preference it. Day three, that's the only one I'm going to buy, and I'm going to give you the time for that transition and map it out. So you can shape the market in that way. You've got to be very careful with disbenefits, though. Sometimes by doing that, you can create unforeseen problems. So you've got to think it through. In as much as, if the industry doesn't develop in the way that you think it does, you'll end up importing at higher carbon cost anyway. Using the English expression coals to Newcastle, you will be shipping in replacements from overseas that come at a higher carbon impact, or maybe and higher cost to the disbenefit of the local economy. So you've got to manage it carefully, but signal to the market that it's going to happen in incremental steps. Let the market prepare. I mean, cement is a great example because there are a lot of good technologies already proven for lowering the impact of and the energy usage in cement, and also for capturing waste within as binders and so forth, and using lower temperatures. And the nirvana could be chemical cementation processes that don't actually use any electricity at all. Those are being piloted in a number of countries.
Well, we have a 2-minute lightning round that I'd like to have right now with the panel as our final statements. And that means everybody gets 1 minute to say what your main suggestion is for the main theme of this conference on resilience in infrastructure. And I'll start with you, baby.
Okay.
1001, 1002, 1 minute.
Yeah, I would like to end on a more optimistic note, because previously we've discussed about this uncertainty of the lack of geopolitical wills, but I do think that at least for the financial world, if investing in something that is resilient and infrastructure makes economic sense, I think they will do that. So I think what we need to do is to make that asset attractive, making that a good investable business case for them. And I think every one of us sitting here can play a role. So just very quickly, that we are a China-based think tank that actually talk a lot with a wide network of financial institutions in China, and they are all very interested to understand more about how they can, channel more capital into the climate and resilience worlds. But there's also a lot to do in terms of, capacity building, and also making them more aware about what type of infrastructure projects can be considered and can have positive impacts. So yeah, I think this is one suggestion that I would say that really people from different backgrounds and different sectors should really sit and to have this kind of multi-stakeholder dialogue to understand and to identify collaboration opportunities.
Excellent. Okay. Quick one.
The Bridgetown Initiative, run by Mia Motley, calls for correctly a huge facility to bring down the cost of currency hedging. The cost of currency hedging is the elephant in the room in terms of international infrastructure finance for developing countries. We should follow the Bridgetown Initiative.
Okay, Arshia.
So I would really like to use this platform to say to institutional investors, to multilateral development banks that you should look out for standards like FAST-Infra Label that can really help to, streamline due diligence costs, reduce your reporting burden, give you the confidence to assess what projects are really sustainable, and thereby collectively bridge this $3 trillion infrastructure financing gap. Thank you.
Great. One more, Victor.
Thanks. The topic of the International Day for Biodiversity, celebrated on 22nd of May, is live in harmony with nature. So I wish that infrastructure develop in harmony with nature, especially in regions.
Well done. Well said. I vote for that.
Okay, well, I'll abdicate. That's the winner. The currency of measurement of sustainability is data. It builds up from there. We've got to start collecting it. We've got to understand it. We've got to understand the standards. And then we know what we're doing.
And I would add sharing data is one of my favorite issues.
Yeah.
Has to go with it. The world needs a collective database to be able to do all of this stuff, and we're not doing it yet. So we could add tons more, and I'm sure you have thoughts. It would be great to meet you out in the hall and have your questions to directed to the participants. But I'd like to thank you very much for attending, and we hope to hear from you more in the future on this topic. It's a fascinating topic. Thank you, panel.